New Orleans Pelicans fans, I think it's time to start over. Welcome in or welcome back. First of all, from me and mine to you and yours, happy Thanksgiving. I hope you had a good one. I know that the title of the video and the thumbnail may seem very ominous, very depressing. I don't want to view it through that lens. I actually want to view this through a positive lens on what could be the future for the New Orleans Pelicans. But we are going to have to talk about some bad. And if you're a New Orleans Pelicans fan, or even culturally aware of what's going on in New Orleans, you know they have not had a great season. Just a little peek behind the curtain here. I'm recording this on November 24th, and I will be posting it on the following Friday. But at the time of recording, the New Orleans Pelicans are dead last in the West behind the Utah Jazz, who I'm pretty sure are trying to lose games. And listen, don't get me wrong. I don't think that this is necessarily the fault of any of the players on the team. If anything, it's the fault of the lack of players on the team. The lack of healthy players, that is. Now, again, some of this can change, but this is the injury report at the time of recording, and all of your heavy hitters are here. Shams reported recently that Zion is nowhere close to returning, and I think in the landscape of sports journalism, and especially reporting on injuries, that is so rare to give an update that there is no update, that there is no timetable to return. So this injury for Zion could be way worse than we expected. And like I said, some of this can change, but as of right now, there's not a real timetable on some of your biggest stars. Zion has absolutely no timetable. Jose Alvarado isn't going to be reevaluated for another 3 weeks, and CJ McCollum and DeJounte Murray are ramping up, and there's going to be some point within the next week or two where they're going to play basketball games. But at this point in the season, where we're almost a quarter of the way through the season, I think it's going to be really difficult to incorporate those pieces back into it when there's already a habit of losing. The head of the snake here is obviously Zion Williamson. Incredible when he can stay on the floor. The problem is that he is never on the floor. And because we've had such a long history of that with all of his time in the league, I think now is the opportunity and now is the time where you take it down for parts. You get rid of everything except for a couple core young role players and get some luck in the draft. Like I said, this isn't the fault of any of the players on the team. It's the fault of the lack of healthy players on the team. But once those players are healthy, I think that you can get some good trade value out of them. I just don't think it's going to turn into a 500 season for them. Let's take a look first to CJ McCollum. This is obviously a very small sample size. He's only played 4 games this season, but his numbers look pretty good. 19, 4 and 4 on 45, 38, and 70% shooting from the line. That's not great, but that's going to buff out in the end. He's a career around 80% free throw shooter. And I see one of 2 avenues for CJ if you were to look to trade him. I think that there will be a contender who needs a scoring punch, potentially off the bench, now that CJ's kind of getting up there in age and he may be wanting to, or the team would want to shift him to a new era in his career. Or, much like Malcolm Brogdon, there's going to be a young team that needs veteran leadership, and I couldn't imagine someone else better in the league than CJ McCollum. I should mention DeJounte Murray here. I truly love DeJounte as a player. I think he's great. I think he got scapegoated in Atlanta. He should have had a very good season, but obviously got derailed by breaking his hand. Again, I think that he could be a good player, and I think he could be a good player for a different basketball team. But again, bringing all these good players in when you have had this rocky start already, it's not going to convert into a 500 season. It's not going to convert, especially in the West, into even a play-in spot. So I think you're kind of fighting an uphill battle. And to avoid that, I think you need to get rid of everything. And DeJounte Murray will be one of those pieces that will get a lot of draft picks back. And then, of course, we have Zion. Zion, again, incredible when he's healthy. The problem is that he is never healthy. Again, very limited sample size here, only 6 games, but Zion is averaging 23, 8, and 5 on 45, 33, 67 shooting splits. And we can say whatever we want about Zion. We can talk about his worth ethic. We can talk about his ability to stay healthy. I still think that for all of the problems that Zion has, he is still so incredible on the basketball court when he is on the floor that there's going to be some team out there that will give up at least 2 first-round picks for him despite all of the baggage that he has. I also want to mention this report that came out recently. There is some internal strife with Zion and his camp, not necessarily the Pelicans front office, but his internal camp. He fired his agency, he fired his representation, apparently, reportedly, because he was frustrated that he was not traded to the Knicks. The Knicks obviously traded for both Mikal Bridges and Karl Anthony Towns, and their assets are kind of dried up at this point. So now Zion doesn't get to go to his favorite spot, and now he's butthurt about it. And that's not a secret by any means. When he was coming into the draft, he was hoping and praying, according to all reports available, that the Knicks would have got the number 1 pick in that draft. And I think we can be safe to say, of course, we don't know how things would have changed if he was drafted to the Knicks, but I think it's safe to say, based on everything we've seen so far, that the Knicks kind of got off scot-free for that one. And last but certainly not least, the one beacon of hope for this Pelicans team so far, Brandon Ingram. Brandon Ingram has only missed one game this year at the time of recording and has averaged 23, 6, and 5 on 47, 36, 83 shooting splits, being the undisputed absolute number one guy for the Pelicans, again, because of all the injuries. And I want to go a little bit more in depth on Brandon Ingram. I love his game personally. It's a little bit of a throwback as far as living in the mid-range. I think that he has the ability, obviously, to stretch out to the three-point line, and he's definitely more comfortable doing that than, say, someone like DeMar DeRozan. But I love Brandon Ingram's mid-range game, and I think it's a dying art. Because of how skilled he is, and because of how good he still is and his ability to be on the floor, I think there's going to be some teams calling for his services. It just depends on the situation. This summer, I would have said that the Memphis Grizzlies would have taken a swing on him, pairing him up with a healthy Ja Morant, Jaren Jackson, Desmond Brain, and all of them. But now I think that the Grizzlies, even though they aren't great either, I think they're kind of resting on the fact that they have so many good role players that they're not in the market for him anymore. I do think that there will be some teams that are interested in him, though, the Spurs being one of them. Now, admittedly, I don't know how likely this would be just because he isn't on the same timeline of someone like Wemby or Stephon Castle, the very clear future building blocks of this franchise. But I think if they were to get someone who could pack that scoring punch, if you wanted to upgrade from someone like Keldon Johnson or a Devin Vassell, I think that you could do that in Brandon Ingram. Not to say that I don't think Devin Vassell and Keldon Johnson are good players, because I very much think that they are. I just think that if we're talking about peaks here, Brandon Ingram has the higher peak. The Rockets are another team that I think could take a swing on Brandon Ingram. That would require them to give up on some of their young assets, though most importantly, Jabari Smith Jr. Jabari Smith Jr. has not played well up to this point. He is still trying to find himself within that offense, and I think that if the Rockets were going to give up on someone, if they were going to trade for Brandon Ingram, it would have to be Brandon Ingram for Jabari Smith Jr., and whatever amount of draft picks. And the last young team that I think could trade for Brandon Ingram is going to be the Portland Trail Blazers. And they're going to have to move off of DeAndre Ayton eventually, because Donovan Clingan has become one of the best shot blockers in the entire league, even with limited minutes on the floor. And as a Celtics fan, it would be remiss of me to not talk about Robert Williams just for a second and mention how good of a season he is having, especially beside Donovan Clingan. I'm insane, and I want the Trailblazers to unleash the double big Donovan Clingan Time Lord lineup on the rest of the league. I know they're not going to do it, but I do think that both of them, their shot blocking ability, their rebounding ability has been so good that it's almost made DeAndre Ayton expendable, for lack of a better term. Now, there is one contender that I think could potentially make a swing for him, but because of how good they are this season, I don't think it's very likely, and that's the Golden State Warriors. They were obviously in the market for Lauri Markkanen last summer. They were trying to get him and trade a bunch of role players, and it's worked out for the best that they actually didn't, because of how hugely the rest of the role players on that team have stepped up. I think by all metrics, Steph Curry is having a down year, but that is only because everyone else has stepped up. Steph doesn't have to score 33 a night for him to be an impact player for his team to win. He's averaging like 25 points a game, and they're at the top of the West currently. So yeah, if there was a contender that was going to take a swing at Brandon Ingram, I think it would be the Warriors. But again, I don't think, because of how good they are and because of how good the role players have been, I don't think they would be willing to give up said role players to get Brandon Ingram. But it is interesting to think about. Again, at the time of recording, the Pelicans are 4-13 at the very bottom of the West. I just think that even if you were to get all of these players back and they were all healthy, even if you were to somehow magically guarantee that they were going to play every single game for the rest of the year, I don't think that it would actually turn into anything fruitful. There is some good science behind this, but rhythm is a real factor when it comes to sports. You can't get into a groove once you're this bad. Once you start developing a habit or you are in the routine of losing games, it's impossible. It is almost impossible to claw out of that. I mean, they would have to win the next 9 games in a row just to break 500. And especially in the West, 500 is not a very good basketball team. The Sacramento Kings are a 500 team right now, and they are 12th. They would miss the play-in entirely. The Pelicans have 9 first-round draft picks between now and 2031, and I think they could improve on that with trading all of these assets. Zion, CJ McCollum, DeJounte Murray, and Brandon Ingram. I think as long as you're able to keep some core guys, in my mind, Jordan Hawkins, Trey Murphy III, Herb Jones, and Jose Alvarado, if you could keep those 4 intact and get some luck within the upcoming drafts, especially this one with Cooper Flagg and Ace Bailey and Boogie Fland and a bunch of other good players, I think if you were to keep them and get some luck in the draft, this could be a very intriguing team going forward. And just to reiterate, it's not like I want the Pelicans to have to strip down and go through another rebuilding process like they did post Anthony Davis, but I think it's time. CJ McCollum is 33 years old. He's not getting any younger. Zion Williamson is never, ever, ever healthy. And like I have mentioned before, it's hard to incorporate these pieces, these very good pieces, back into a team that is already losing so much. If I were the Pelicans, I would strip this team down to the studs and hope that I get Ace Bailey or Cooper Flagg in this year's draft. But what do I know? I'm just a guy with a microphone. What do you think the Pelicans should do? Do you think they should ride it out? Do you think they should tear everything down for studs? Do you think they should do something in the middle? Let me know down in the comments below. Check my link tree while you're at it. Join the Discord. Follow me on Blue Sky. Be kind. Tell somebody you love them. I'll see you in the next one.